Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second Extraordinary Circumstances public workshop for the 2050 Mobility Plan update for the City of Port St. Lucie. My name is Mary Savage Dunham. I'm the Director of Planning. With me is my colleague Bethany Grubbs assisting, and we also have our consultant Jonathan Paul with New Urban Concepts. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to go through our presentation and ask you to hold your questions until the end. When we get to the end, we'll put a microphone in the middle of the aisle for anyone that's in person, and you can queue up and provide your name, and please speak into the microphone so everyone can hear your questions and we can document it. We also have people joining us on Zoom, and for people on Zoom, if you'd like to ask a question, we'll ask you to put it into the chat, and then my colleague will read your question out loud and we'll answer it that way. Again, we'll do questions at the very end. And so today is our second Extraordinary Circumstances public workshop, which is required. After this, we're going to move to incorporate all the feedback and finalize our mobility plan update and fee schedule for consideration by the City Council. But before we get there, we need to continue on with our outreach. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan Paul.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the principal of New Urban Concepts, and today we're going to present to you the extraordinary circumstances related to the update of Port St. Lucie's mobility plan and mobility fee. The city has had a mobility plan in place now since 2001, so this is an update of this version. One of the bigger changes between the last update and this one is now we are using the 2050 timeframe as our horizon. That is consistent with the recent updates of the long-range transportation plans that are going on throughout the state of Florida. But in essence, it continues the city's transition and vision to provide a multimodal system that allows people to walk, bicycle, access transit, or drive their own vehicle. It's not pro-bike, pro-walk, or anti-car. It's what's the best way to get people around safely and quickly throughout the city of Port St. Lucie. The plan itself identifies projects at a very high level. This is really the first stage of these projects. Each one of these projects will then go through its own separate design process, engineering, and then ultimately the City Council will prioritize these on an annual basis as part of their capital improvements programming. The mobility plan itself is available online, and every bit of information that I'm going to be presenting to you today is available from the city's website to be downloaded. The mobility plan itself consists of 3 overall roadway plans broken down into those projects that are either already under construction or likely will be under construction by 2030. The vast majority of projects are included in the midterm plan, which is between 2030 and 2040. And some of the larger, bigger scale projects are in the 2040 to 2050 timeframe, because ultimately for larger scale projects, it does take that long for them to move from the concept to actual planning, engineering, design, and ultimately construction stages. The city has experienced rapid growth that we'll get into as part of this presentation. That growth has necessitated us looking at some alternative corridors out there. These were originally included as part of the plan, and through a lot of the vetting and the community input, each one of these corridors, while it has some positives from a traffic standpoint, there are also other considerations in considering neighborhood impact, noise impact, environmental. None of the projects were easy or clean or had available right-of-way ready to go. So each one of them will require a much further evaluation before the City Council ever elects to move forward in terms of including them in the plan themselves or moving forward with design work. There are also a number of intersections identified throughout the city, both including adding turn lanes, traffic signals, and new roundabouts. There's a significant multimodal plan component of this, which includes sidewalks, bicycle lanes, shared use pathways, greenways, and boardwalks. And then finally, there's the groundwork for a transit circulator plan that was initially included in the last mobility plan, and it's updated as part of this overall process. And really, it focuses on several potential pilot projects in and around the downtown area, the Tradition area, to see the feasibility of different types of smaller scale transit service. When we originally started this process at the beginning of the year, the total mobility plan cost was $3.3 billion, excluding developer roads. Had we included developer roads, it would be almost $4.3 billion. Through a lot of the feedback we've gotten from the community, we've whittled that down. We've really focused on the top priorities, and those are ones that can be reasonably built or under designed in the next 10 to 15 years. And so the overall plan's gone down to roughly $2.2 billion, of which $1.7 billion of that is currently unfunded. In terms of funding, we have some anticipated contributions from the state as far as it relates to some interchange work. And then there's several projects such as Port St. Lucie Boulevard and Floresta that are already under construction today. What is a mobility fee? The city has had a mobility fee in place now since 2021. It replaced the city's road impact fee at the time. It also replaced transportation concurrency. It's a one-time fee paid by new development, redevelopment, or change of use that results in additional traffic impact. If you're just remodeling your home, or you're painting your business, or you own a home or business, a mobility fee does not apply to any activities you're doing. It's only on development that generates additional traffic. It's intended to mitigate that traffic by helping to fund the projects identified in the mobility plan. And I'm just showing this really early on. We'll get into much further detail about each one of these fees and the calculations as we go through this process. But this is in essence what a mobility fee is. And these are the full calculations based on the study that we've done. The City Council has given us various direction on phasing in these fees over time, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But just for anybody out there in the audience that doesn't know what a mobility fee is or is somewhat uncertain, if you come in for a single family home, the maximum fee that could be assessed in the area, say that we're in right now, would be $4.26 per 1,000 square feet. That roughly equate to about $4,200 per 1,000 square feet. The typical single family home within Port St. Lucie is 2,000 square feet. So that fee would be $8,420 or so for the east. For the multifamily, most multifamily units are roughly 1,000 square feet in size, so that would be $5,335. But there's a lot of phasing in, and then there's actually differences in these fees depending on where you are located within the city itself. And we'll get into far more detail about each one of these. But any type of land use that actually generates overall traffic or trips is included in the mobility fee schedule. And these aren't brand new fees today. The city has its own mobility fee. St. Lucie County has its own road impact fee. So fees are being assessed today in this community. So these are not all brand new fees being levied on developers. These are updated and increased fees over the current rates. So there are also rates for private education, for assisted living facilities, for places of worship. There's fees for different types of industrial use, and again, they vary based on the location. And we've got a map that will show those locations in further detail. For various type of recreational uses, and we say recreational uses, these are ones that you actually have to pay for. So if you have a gym membership or you have a driving range that you go to, if it's a public use by the city, the county, the state, and it's free and they don't charge you for it, they don't pay a mobility fee. But if it's a commercial enterprise business where you have to pay for it, you would pay a mobility fee. Likewise, there's a fee for office space and for freestanding medical uses. There are 3 different categories of retail. The local retail is for more of the mom and pop, locally type owned businesses. Then there's a multi-tenant retail, which is primarily your Publix anchored shopping centers or any number of the little strip retail centers you see along Gatlin or PSL Boulevard. And then you have freestanding retail, which tend to be your banks, your out parcel restaurants, and some of your gas stations. In addition, COVID sort of ushered in the era of, one, everybody staying in their vehicles to go to a lot of retail uses, and two, a movement amongst a lot of the retail communities to actually downsize some of their footprint and go towards more auto-centric or convenience type of uses. So we also have in this, as part of the fee, if you have a freestanding ATM that you can drive up to or bank drive-through lanes, you would pay for each one of those because those tend to generate additional traffic. If you've been anywhere in Port St. Lucie or anywhere within Florida, you notice how many car washes are popping up on every corner. They're basically the new pharmacy of today. And those generate quite a bit of traffic, largely because they use a subscription model. So you could literally go every single day and wash your car if you wanted to. And those tend to generate quite a bit of traffic, as well as motor vehicle charging and motor vehicle fueling. For the charging, if you have a charging station at your house, or you have a charging station at your hotel, or Publix provides one, or there's one provided in the parking garage, if it's not a commercial business like a gas station or the Tesla arrays where you got to pay for them, but it's something provided for individual use or provided free of charge for a patron, those don't pay. It's just the charging stations where you actually go similar to how you'd fuel a motor vehicle, where you pay for those. For vehicle service, whether you're getting your tires done or a quick lube, it's per bay. Retail uses tended to be just primarily for banks and pharmacies. Now we're seeing them being added to Publix for pharmacy. We're seeing them being added to Targets, to Walmarts, some places up in North Florida. I've even seen some added to Dollar Generals. So it's another way to attract additional traffic, and that traffic in and of itself tends to be sole purpose. So you or myself as an individual, if you're going to the store, oftentimes you go to the gas station, the bank, the grocery store, and one other place. What we're starting to see in the retail trend for deliveries and apps, it's a specific purpose, from a home to pick up goods and then go back to that home. So they tend to have a greater overall impact to the transportation system. And then restaurants, or especially fast food restaurants, are quickly moving to a model to have as small kitchen and space as they can and have as many drive-through lanes as they can as well. And each one of those drive-through lanes, if any of you have been to Chick-fil-A or some of the new types of retail uses, they generate a lot of traffic. So with that said, that gives us a context of where we are today as it relates specifically to extraordinary circumstances. Back in 2021, the legislature enacted policies that said if you as a local government have an impact fee or a mobility fee today and you go to update it, the maximum you can increase that is by 50%. And then if you increase that upwards to 50%, you have to phase that in over 4 years. If you wanted to phase in increase above 50%, or you wanted to have a different phasing schedule, you would need to make a finding of what's known as extraordinary circumstances. The legislature has had several opportunities over the past few years to define extraordinary circumstances. They've elected not to do so. In several bills that have been passed over the last 2 years, you've seen a lot of requirements such as population growth, the number of building permits, the increase in vehicle miles of travel, construction cost, inflation. Those have all been factors identified by your legislatures to define extraordinary circumstances, but ultimately when it gets to the final policy decision, they have not elected to do so. What they have done as of this past session, as they said, as of January 1st of this year, any extraordinary circumstance goes from a supermajority vote of the elected body to a unanimous vote. So the only way you could have extraordinary circumstances after January 1st is a unanimous vote of either your city commission, your city council, or your county commission. And then any increase has to be phased in over at least a 2-year period. So right now, we're still operating under the existing statutory requirements, which requires a study that we've prepared, 2 public workshops. This is the second of those 2 workshops. Ultimately, it's going to require a supermajority vote of the city council, and then that allows for rates higher than 50%. It also allows for alternative phase-ins, or it allows for the city council to adopt at the fully calculated rates. The city council has given us different direction in that, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. There's a lot of information available on the city's website, and there are 3 specific documents to know about. We've had to start separating these just because they've gotten so data intensive and the number of pages. Combined, these 3 documents will probably be over 450 pages in total. So we've identified a mobility plan that focuses specifically on mobility projects and the types of improvements planned over the next 25 years, whether they be roadways, intersections, bike lanes, sidewalks. They're all included in the mobility plan. The mobility fee itself, all the detail, all the calculations, the data, the analysis, all the legal requirements are in a report. It's titled the Draft Mobility Fee Technical Report, dated October 2025. So if you want to know about any of the projects, you go to the mobility plan. If you want to know about the fee calculations itself, you go to the mobility fee technical report. If you wanted to know what we're going to be talking about in further detail this morning, the extraordinary circumstances, that's also a separate study that goes into why we believe the city council should have flexibility to adopt higher rates if they ultimately elect to do so. So just in an overview, and that study goes into it in a little bit more detail, or a lot more detail on each one of these factors. But the ones that I've looked at, and I've done these for communities all throughout the state of Florida, is are you growing faster than the state of Florida? Are you going to continue to grow faster than the state of Florida? What's your overall projected growth like in your specific community, and is there anything unique about that? What is the projected increase in vehicle miles of travel? That's really one of the primary factors that we use to identify and develop the mobility plan. What are the increases in costs that you're experiencing, and what other factors go on specifically in your community related to mobility? And I'll go through each one of these in further detail. And then at a higher level, is the state experiencing similar levels of inflation? Is the national government experiencing similar inflation? Has the city done anything unique to try to help offset some of this cost increase going on to the development community? And then ultimately, have you identified a need for the projects themselves? So with that, the first factor we look at is, are you growing faster than the state of Florida? State of Florida historically has been one of the fastest growing states, if not the fastest growing state in the entire country. So most people would say Florida is growing at a pretty extraordinary rate. So if you're growing faster than Florida, that's a pretty good metric. While you all in this community are used to rapid growth you're experiencing, there are a lot of other parts of Florida that aren't growing faster than the state. North Florida up in Gainesville, Central Florida, the cities in Seminole County, some of the communities on the West Coast, they're all experiencing growth, but they're not growing faster than the state itself. We've looked at several different time frames from 2010 or 2000 all the way up to 2024, and every time frame we've looked at, the city has consistently grown at a much higher rate than the state of Florida, oftentimes double the rate of the state of Florida itself. So we know that's a look at the past. More important is to look at the future, and is the city going to continue to grow? The state of Florida is expected to grow by additional 20%. We're adding upwards to 5 million more residents between now and 2050. St. Lucie County is projected to add up to 292,000 new residents between now and 2050. And of that, the vast majority of them will be located within the city of Port St. Lucie. So our projections are the city could add up to 245,000 additional residents over what you are today. That's basically almost 100% growth rate, or a 91% growth. So imagine, if you have concerns about traffic today, if you have concerns about getting to the store, getting to your schools, imagine the population's double in 2050. If you've lived in Orlando, you lived in Tampa, you lived in Miami, Osceola, other parts of the state, which I've had the opportunity to live in, you'd realize that that growth can happen, and it can happen relatively quickly. The Orlando and the Tampa metro areas themselves, they're basically growing by 250,000 residents every 5 years. So they're adding the population of the city of Port St. Lucie every 5 years. You are a smaller community, you're not as large as those communities themselves, but you still have extraordinary growth, probably one of the highest growth rates in the state of Florida itself. We've also looked at, we've updated the plan. We did this, depending on the data, 2 to 3 years ago as part of the Phase 2 mobility plan and the currently adopted mobility fee rates, which were adopted in October of 2022. So in essence, we're 3 years now from that date. Back at that time, we projected out to 2045, and the population projected then was for 370,000 residents. As we look at this update now out to 2050, we're projecting up to 506,000 residents. So just within a 3-year time frame, the residential increase is roughly 136,000 of what we had planned for 3 years ago versus today. We use a lot of different data and analyses that go into our travel demand modeling, our population projections, our forecasting, and one of the data sources we use are the travel demand models developed by the Department of Transportation and the local MPOs. And back in 2022, this is a sort of study area that we use for Port St. Lucie. Largely Midway Road has always been our northern limits. The intercoastal's been our limits out to the east, Martin County to the south, and then various areas to the western portion of the city itself. When we last did this, there was very little discussion. Let's see if my little laser pointer works here or not. There we go. This is the area that we refer to as the northwest portion of Port St. Lucie in terms of mobility fees. And this is a new area to the west, this is Range Line Road here. And then if that road were to continue going north, that's roughly the boundary that we've had in terms of existing development within the city and then new planned development within the city. There was one major project under discussion the last time we did this, which would have been the Wilder development and Wilder Parkway, and it had not yet started. Since that time, this vast majority of area has come in for either, to relook at approvals that have been on the books since 2008 or to ask for brand new approvals. But this large area through here, there was development consideration, but it really hadn't started taking off yet. Now there's a significant amount of interest and it's taking off. This entire area to the west, which was outside of the urban service district of both the city and the county at the time, wasn't even talked about. There was some development maybe would or wouldn't occur out there. And since that time, there's been a number of developments that have approached both the city and the county itself and have looked to the potential to develop in that area. And whether they ultimately end up in the city or the county, there's a whole host of factors that goes into that. But the reality is there's a lot of development potential in this area. And this first came to light, the city itself, just about 2 years ago, Mary, they did an infrastructure study and they presented those findings roughly a year ago to the city council that showed there's a lot of development potential out in this area that you and the county should probably start looking at in further detail as part of your plans. And so both the county, the city itself, and the MPO as part of this long-range plan process have really been working together to make sure that we're accounting for all this development that's potentially going to happen over the next 25 years within the county, within the city, or some combination thereof. So with that, not only does it bring a lot of people, but people bring traffic. And especially the further west you go, you have fewer and fewer options to either make shorter vehicle trips or to ride a bicycle or to walk or to take a golf cart or to use a transit circulator. If you live in the core part of the tradition or you live in some of the built up portions of Port St. Lucie, while you may not necessarily walk to the Publix, you may only live a mile away or a half mile away, and you can drive relatively short distance to that. The further you go to the west towards Range Line, the further you go north towards Midway, those services aren't there. Retail follows rooftops, and you're seeing it today. You're seeing all the retail starting to come into tradition now. You're seeing a lot of the retail come into other parts of the city, but a lot of those rooftops have been there for a number of years. So it's going to take a while for that type of development to go out west, and because of that, you're going to have much longer trip lengths and much longer overall vehicle miles of travel growth. So just in the 3-year period from our last model update to our next, there's been a 110% increase in vehicle miles of travel just within the area south of Midway Road. We're not, the county, Fort Pierce, they can deal with the county in Fort Pierce north of Midway. We're primarily focused on the area of Midway and south. All of our models, all of our data, all the cell phone data that you get tracked on, the city has access to that through various big data sources. They all show that as Port St. Lucie continues to grow, more and more of the residents stay within Port St. Lucie. They don't necessarily drive up to Fort Pierce. They don't necessarily drive down to Stewart or to Palm Beach County unless they're going down there for work. But increasingly, the percentage of work travel, that's major overall travel, for the last 20 years has gone down from 20% to 15%, to some communities south of here, less than 10% of the traffic that goes on throughout the day. So in Port St. Lucie, it's about 15% of all trips are work trips. 85% is you doing everything else. Going to a place of worship, going to the bank, coming here to a meeting like this. But what it isn't doing is getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning, driving, going in an office all day, and then coming back at 5 in the afternoon. That represents 15% of the travel in the city now. So that means 85% of the travel is everything else. And what occurs during that is that 85% of the travel occurs throughout the entire day. So that's why you're seeing before it used to be traffic used to be really bad in the morning or the afternoon, and now it feels like traffic's bad all the time. Well, that's because people are driving all the time, and they say, well, hey, I don't have to get up to go to work, so I'm going to go to get my coffee at 9:30 or 10. Well, now they have 30% of the other population saying, I don't have to get up and go to work because I work remotely. I'm going to go to get my coffee at 9:30 or 10, and they're all going out to the roadways. And actually, it's just for the first big metro area that's just actually finally stated this. Atlanta has just had a study. If you've ever driven up in Atlanta, traffic's horrible. But they say now Atlanta, there is no peak. Traffic is jam-packed pretty much the entire day from 6 in the morning till 11 o'clock in the evening. If you go down to Miami, you go to Tampa, Orlando, that's probably a reality pretty close in a lot of Florida. So it's a lot of traffic to deal with, and it's not necessarily just a peak hour problem anymore. We've done extensive modeling and a lot of work with the city, with the county, with the MPO. There are a number of corridors that we have identified that are going to be needed in the future. Again, a lot of these are not simple ideas. They're going to be ones that require a lot more study. So when we did this plan the last time, we had 1.4 miles of corridor studies as part of our mobility plan. Now I believe we have upwards to 45 miles of corridor studies. And these are looks at how do you accommodate this traffic. We know the basic widenings that can occur and the basic improvements that can be built in the city, but those aren't necessarily going to be enough to accommodate all the traffic once you get beyond the 2040 timeframe. Just in terms of the overall need for capacity, there was a big focus on the last mobility plan to basically design roads similar to Floresta. So the concept was to have roundabouts that move traffic more efficiently, have raised medians to help minimize some of the cut through in terms of all the driveways, and to help make some of the traffic flow a little bit easier. And I think for the Floresta model, that's worked out well. A lot of the traffic and the modeling we're seeing now, we had a number of those corridors identified, and now they're all saying that even with those efficiencies of a median and roundabouts, you're not having enough capacity to serve the future demand. And reality is you're going to need a 4-lane roadway. That's happened on Bayshore, it's happened on portions of Torino, Kashmir. Several corridors that we had identified as similar to Floresta are now all needing to be widened to 4 lanes. And that's resulted in an increase of additional $1 billion, and also double the need of road capacity from basically 1.2 million upwards to 3.3 million vehicles to be accommodated. It's not to say that we're still not planning sidewalks and bicycle lanes and shared use pathways, but some of the features we'd hoped to have in terms of a multimodal lane that could accommodate a transit vehicle and next to a scooter, next to a golf cart. In reality, there needs to be a roadway travel lane for those, because that's really the increased demand for a lot of those corridors. So just as part of, just in 3 years time horizon, in the phase 2 plan, we had roughly 27 miles of roadway that were going to be designed similar to Floresta. That's now decreased to 11 miles. In phase 2 plan, we had roughly 9 miles of 4-lane roads identified. In this plan, we have 64 miles identified. So that's a 600% increase in terms of the need for road capacity over what we had planned for just 3 years ago. And that's not to say that all the mobility, the roundabouts the city is putting in, all the infrastructure that they're looking at in certain corridors, those are going to help on those corridors. But when we looked at a Savona, a California, a Bayshore, if we ran that model of a 2-lane divided versus a 4-lane, the 4-lane accommodated the traffic each time. And that's really the reality of it. And part of what we've also witnessed is just in the last 5 years alone, from 2020 to 2025, the city has added 60,000 residents. During that time, the city has not annexed in any properties. So that's 60,000 in-migration residents net over anybody that leaves. So that's a lot of people coming into your community in a 5-year period, or basically 25% of the previous population has moved to Port St. Lucie in the last 5 years. And so that's extraordinary growth. And that's one of the primary reasons that we're here today. The city council is doing everything it can to keep up with that growth. It's got, if you drive around this community, you see sidewalks being built, you see turn lanes being put in, traffic signals. There's a robust website showing all the capital improvements. But when you're growing that rapidly, it takes a little while to be able to catch up to that. And even with all that, that doesn't necessarily mean we'll be able to rest on our laurels unless we start all flying around in aerial mobility, which is something that's being looked at in other parts of the state. And ultimately, it will probably be part of the overall transportation system for certain portions of it. But the reality is there are other corridors that are needed. As much as the 4-lane roadways that we're providing are going to help north-south traffic and help move traffic throughout the community, we don't necessarily have solutions for Port St. Lucie Boulevard that's already 6 lanes, or Crosstown Parkway that's already 6 lanes, or St. Lucie West is going to eventually be 6 lanes. There's going to be needs for additional travel corridors along that, or you got to start either dealing with a lot more traffic or some creative type of ideas that they've used elsewhere in the state, such as putting, roadways up in the median to accommodate some of the travel between major state roads. And that was just one of the projects we looked at on Port St. Lucie Boulevard, was a raised elevated roadway corridor from US 1 to the Florida Turnpike, connecting those two, because some of the projections were as high as 90,000 cars a day on that roadway. We don't have a solution for that today. There is a corridor study that we're looking at, and it's something that's going to be looked at. And part of the reason is you're a historically platted community. There's only so many roadway corridors that are available to be widened, so there's going to have to be a lot of creativity to continue to accommodate travel in the future. Cost. Everybody realizes costs have gone up. There was a hope as of 2023, 2024, 2025 that those costs would have leveled off and we wouldn't have continued seeing the inflation that we've been experiencing since COVID. The reality is that hasn't happened. Costs have continued to go up, especially for roadway construction. The overall cost of the plan 3 years ago was $1.2 billion. Now it's increased to $2.2 billion, an increase of over $1 billion just in a 3-year period. And that means a lot of the roadway costs have gone up by double. Some have even gone up by triple in terms of what we experienced just a few years ago. It used to be that you could do a sidewalk for $250,000, $300,000 a mile. Then it went up to $750,000 to $800,000. Now some of the new sidewalks are coming out there at $1.2, $1.3 million a mile, and that's for a 5 or 6 foot sidewalk. That's not for a brand new road or for a widened road. So we are dealing with some incredible cost increase within the city, and even throughout the state, they're dealing with that as well. And so one of the factors we looked at is Port St. Lucie just an isolated event? Is it only here that this is happening? The state of Florida has all the pricing power of a state that has 25 million people in it. It's the 3rd largest state in the country. DOT works with contractors everywhere. And even just in their own and these aren't even the specific final cost, these are just in their long-range estimates that they use for planning purposes. Just in the 3-year time frame, there's a little bit of lag every time in terms of when they release their numbers, but their planning numbers that we use in a mobility plan and their planning numbers and what they're using today for their forecast increased over 100% just in a 3-year period. And this is the state of Florida. This isn't Port St. Lucie. This is the state of Florida with all the pricing power that goes along with the state of Florida. So it's not something just being witnessed within this community itself. We also looked at the national inflation. National is probably not as good a tell as Florida because it includes a lot of areas of the country that aren't growing. This includes your Wyomings, your Vermonts, your Maines, the entire country. Even at that level, inflation is still ticking at 12.5% per year. During the height of COVID, and when we last looked at this, it was 13.3% per year. Between 2008 and 2018, it was less than 1% a year. And DOT's costs on average were 3.5% per year. Now we're looking at 25 and 30% a year. So all these factors play into the overall increasing need and the cost of the plan itself. So in just the 3-year period, we had last projected an unfunded need for the roadway projects themselves of 400 and existing funding. This is what we believe is anticipated or available. 420 million was identified back in 2022, and we've identified 514 million. So this helps to actually offset some of the overall cost to the mobility plan. Part of this is already programmed for money from Floresta and Port St. Lucie Boulevard. There's a cost of the Marshall Parkway interchange that's included in here, and we've assumed that 90% of that will be borne by the state and federal government. And then there's some other revenues that the cities anticipates. So, we've even increased the overall revenues that are available to help offset the fees, but the fees themselves have still increased from what we've done 3 years ago. And then finally, the overall plan itself, the county, as they're going through their update of their roadway impact fees, they don't have a list of projects that their fee is based on. It's just based on the average cost of construction of a roadway. The mobility fee itself is based on all the projects that are included in the mobility plan. So if you want to know what's going to be funded or how it's going to be funded or how it's calculated, it's all there. All the projects have been identified, they've been vetted, and because they've been vetted over the last year, the actual cost of that overall plan has gone from $3.3 billion down to a $2 billion time frame or a dollar amount. So we've documented the need, and the need's real, the need's legitimate, and these corridors have been looked at. Any of the corridors that we had basically identified as conceptual or to help with some of the traffic, but nobody had really had a chance to thoroughly vet them, those have now all been moved to corridor studies. They are not included in the overall cost of these projects, except for the cost to fund a planning design study or a PD&E study, but their construction cost is not included in the mobility fee. Every one of those is going to have to go through a much further analyses, and that's part of the reason why that plan's gone from $3.3 billion down to $2 billion. One of the things the City Council has directed us to do is any increase in the fees themselves to look at phasing them in over a 4-year period. And we've done these for all the uses, regardless of whether they're 50% above or not. If they're projected to decrease by 30% or 28% or under 25%, even though statute has some provisions where you can phase those in a little bit quicker, just to be consistent with everybody, all the increases are all phased in over a 4-year time frame. And so as I go through these next fees, and we're getting pretty close to wrapping up here, now we're going to kind of get into the fee numbers themselves. But we sort of color-coded the different areas of the city with the fee schedules themselves. So the large area in green that you see is what we refer to as our east assessment area. The dark areas are already City of Port St. Lucie today. The light green areas are unincorporated county. The fee is not charged in unincorporated county, but if those areas were to annex into the city, then this is the assessment area or the zone they'd fall under. Likewise, in the northwest, you see a darker blue and a lighter blue. The lighter blue is unincorporated county, the darker blue is the city. If those areas within unincorporated county that are undeveloped were to annex into the city, they would fall under the northwest fee. The southwest is pretty much all within the City of Port St. Lucie. That's largely the tradition area. Then you have the area out to the west. Again, this is Range Line Road, which is sort of the dividing line. The vast majority of this area today is unincorporated county. So if all this area stayed unincorporated county, the fee that we're showing into the west would not be applicable. If they annex into the City of Port St. Lucie, it would then become applicable as part of their overall development. And so each one of the schedules that we've looked at for the east, for the southwest, the northwest, and the west, they are all color-coded, so it's a little bit easier to go through these. And I'm gonna go through the single-family residential examples. There's a whole bunch of land uses here. If anybody's in particular that has a question about some other land use, we'd be happy to answer it at the end. We'd also have opportunities after this to meet and discuss these. But for the most part, most people are interested, at least in the single-family residential initially. So we're going to focus our time and attention on that one. So today, for the area in the east, at a per 1,000 square foot rate, the existing fees, and these existings are The city's fee plus what we collect for the county is $3,660 per 1,000 square feet for a single-family residential use. As part of the mobility fee update, that increases by $4,261, and a share of that is for the increase. This increase does not include the county, but what it does include is I believe 11.5% reduction in the fee. As part of our travel and part of our analyses, we've identified that 11.5% of the travel in the east occurs on county roadways. So of that fee, 11% of that could go towards county road projects. The total dollar increase between the two of these is $601. Annually, that's a $150 increase. So the way the phasing would work is that's your baseline number. That's your number in 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. One of the reasons, besides helping to mitigate some of the impact of increases to the development community, is the county right now is going through an update of its fees. And then the county in itself have what's known as an interlocal agreement between the two parties that expires in 2027. So there's going to be discussion over these next 2 years, what share of this is county, what share of this is city, and then ultimately what is the number. All we can do as the city is calculate what our numbers show. And what our data and analysis shows, and what our data analysis has pretty consistently shown for the last 3 times we've done this, what shares should go to the county, what share could go to the city. Ultimately, both parties came to a negotiation in 2022. That's likely what's going to happen over the next 2 years. So the final share between the city and county is going to be worked out. But as of 2027, when the interlocal does expire, that 3,000, sorry. All right. That number, here we can go back, I'll start using that thing. As of 2027, the city fee would be the only fee collected in the city once the interlocal agreement expires. That would be the dollar amount, $3,960. So there's going to need to be some discussion between the city and county. The county itself, I believe, has a next hearing on December 2nd with what they're proposing to do. They've had a bunch of discussions about whether they are or aren't going to raise a fee or whether they'll have any type of phasing in there. So there's going to be ongoing discussions with the city and county, working through these numbers and trying to come up with something that works for the overall development community. Ultimately, it took a year the last time of mediation to work something out between both parties, and ultimately something did get worked out. And I believe over the next 2 years, this phasing will allow for that time frame for the negotiations between the city and the county to be worked out as well, so the development community is not paying more than their reasonable share of the cost of this. Again, it's our intent to charge development its share of the cost of the improvements. Ultimately, whatever the county ends up doing, the county would need to defend its numbers, just like the city would need to defend its own numbers. But there is going to be ongoing discussions between both parties, and I'm sure a lot of that will be out there for the public. There will be coordination with the development community, and again, ultimately the goal should be the development community is not paying more than its fair share of the overall cost between the city and county. So then this likewise goes through all the other uses that are there. the multifamily, the overnight lodging, the mobile home, and you'll see that of those numbers, they will be phased in over a 4-year period. So when we first started this, for the east side, the numbers were about $15,000 a dwelling unit. So they've come down about half as we've gone through this overall process in terms of our initial calculations to where we are today. They've come down, well, either half or basically they've come down 100% in terms of the overall amount. And then likewise, we have these for the various fees. And in the extraordinary circumstance study, if you want to know, some people like whole dollar amounts, others want to see the percentage. Both in the technical report and in the study, we have both the dollar amounts and the percentages for every one of these categories, every one of the assessment areas. So if you have a chance and you want to go look at what percentage this increased or what's the difference between this fee and that fee, it's all provided in those technical reports. So for the southwest area, the fee is actually lower than the east. This is the case today. And part of that is because you have developers in that area that have obligations to build the roadways. So to make sure that we're not charging developers twice for the same cost, we less out those roadways that the developers are going to build or have an obligation to build from the calculation itself. So that helps to reduce the overall fee within the southwest area. So if you look at the fees today, this isn't new. The east has always been higher than the southwest because the southwest has had the biggest commitment from the development community to help build that infrastructure. So their fee, you see from there, it's going up $93 over the 4-year period, going up from an increase of $31.90 up to $32.83, and then ultimately up to $3,500. So for a typical home in Port St. Lucie out in Tradition, by 2029, that fee would be $7,000. That's lower than the east side, and that's lower than the other two areas as well. And part of that is because, one, they do have more and more support services being built there, so those trips aren't having to go as far. And then two, the development community has made a big commitment to build roadways out there. And so we're making sure that they're not being charged twice for those same roadways. And likely you go through and you see all the numbers, they're lower through all the land uses throughout the whole southwest area. For the northwest area, those fees are a little bit higher than the east, and they're higher than the southwest, which is the same case as it is today. Part of that happens to do with geography. The further away you get, the longer the overall trip distances are. Two, as of today, there aren't as many support uses out in the northwest. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as you start to get more retail uses out there, office uses, schools, parks, what have you, those fees will naturally start to come down as well because people won't have to drive as far. But over the next 5 to 10 years, it's still going to take a while for those support services to be out there. One thing the northwest, southwest, and the east reflect, though, unlike the west side or the east side of the city, where 10% of the travel is on county roads, out in the western portion, it's 22.5%. So we have lessed out this fee 22.5% to account for travel on county roads. So that will be part of the negotiations that goes back and forth but between the county, because they do have more roadways out west. While those roadways don't have a lot of traffic on them, they're really long. Range Line's 7 miles long, Glades is 9 miles long, Midway's 7 miles long. Even with those long lengths, compared to how high the volumes are within Tradition, it's still only 22% of the overall travel. And interestingly enough, for the state road system, it's zero. Port St. Lucie is an anomaly amongst the entire state of Florida. The only other jurisdiction that maintains as many roadways as Port St. Lucie does in terms of miles of roadways is Duval, Jacksonville County, and their unified government. The city itself, at last count, I think is maintaining over 1,000 miles of roadway. The fact that your only 2 state roads are US 1 and a portion of Port St. Lucie Boulevard, it's unheard of. The fact that your county roads, to the extent they exist east of the interstate, they're all on the periphery. You have no county road going through the city of Port St. Lucie. If you go to any other municipality in the state of Florida that's of the size of Port St. Lucie, you won't find that anywhere. So if you go up to Fort Pierce, 97% of the collector and arterial roadways are state and county roads in Fort Pierce. Here in Port St. Lucie, I think it's about 15% county and state. All the rest is owned and maintained by the city of Port St. Lucie. So Port St. Lucie is an anomaly. It is extremely different than any other municipality within the state of Florida. And it does have an extremely, has a robust need. That's a lot of roadways, a lot of corridors that have to be planned for, designed, and ultimately built. And so that's what a lot of these numbers end up reflecting. So one of the big differences, though, east and west of the interstate, is there is a higher share of travel that occurs in the county road system, and a part of this fee will ultimately be a portion of the county fee, depending on how interlocal agreements work between the two parties. And then the one new area is the western portion of the community. Right now, a large portion of that area is unincorporated county. Again, if none of that area ever annexes into the city, this schedule doesn't apply. If that area does annex into the city of Port St. Lucie, this schedule would apply. And just in terms of, fees and calculations, the further away you are from the interstate system, or the further away you are from shops, from places of worship, from pharmacies, from schools, the more you have to drive. And the further you got to drive, the more impact you have on the roadway system. The western area reflects that there is no roadway network out there at all today. You have Range Line Road and you have a portion of Glades. Range Line Road's basically 20 foot of asphalt with deep canals on both sides of it. Glades has a railroad track on one side, canals on the other side, and it's also a 2-lane roadway with very few turn lanes. That's the roadway network serving the western portion of the area, which could be upwards to 130,000 residents over the next 25 years. So there's a lot of roadways that they're going to have to build as part of just their overall development. And then there's corridors that the city's identified, the corridors that the county's identified, that they'll likely have to have a share of that. So their fee is the highest of the overall because they're the furthest away from any types of services. But to give some context, when we first started this, the Western mobility fee was $35,000 per dwelling unit. That's what our initial count was. February, I believe, or March of this year, we released numbers for each one of these. The Southwest was around 15,000, the East was around 15,000, the Northwest was 25,000, the West was 35,000. Now the fee we're down to is $5,400 per 1,000 square feet, or roughly $10,800. So it's basically come down by about 200% from our original calculations. So I will say our original calculations were high. The county's own calculations had them over $16,000, $17,000 per dwelling unit as well out there. So they weren't unreasonable in terms of all the infrastructure that's needed. What's happened is we've looked at the timing of that infrastructure, how much of it still needs to be studied, how much of it needs to be coordinated with the county, and ultimately we've come to a fee that's it's still higher. I'm not going to sugarcoat that it's not a higher fee. It is a higher fee, but there's a lot of infrastructure that it's going to go towards funding as well. But it has come down a significant amount, as it has come down for all the land uses in the western portion of the city and the county. And we're getting close here to wrapping up to open up to any questions. So we're continuing to take feedback. This is a workshop. We're going to welcome any of the questions that you have. We have been receiving a lot of input over the last 3 weeks. We tried to make sure we put out all this information 3 weeks ago so that everybody would have a chance to look at it. We have purposely not done interim updates so somebody couldn't say, well, I looked at this version and then you only gave me 2 days to look at this next version. We've been compiling all the feedback that you've given to us. We're going to continue to compile that, and then we're going to come out with one big update that represents all that feedback that we've been given to you, so that any members of the public, any members of the development community, you're all going to be looking at the same information at the same time. There's not any, switch here, switch there, playing around with the numbers. We're going to be presenting everything in its entirety. This represents the last of the public workshops. The next hearings we will be going to will be the first reading of the ordinance, and then ultimately the second reading is when the city council would decide whether or not they do or don't want to move forward with this, or whether they want to use some other phasing schedule, some other different types of number. Given where we are in the schedule and the holiday season, those hearings would likely be sometime in the December timeframe, but they have not been decided yet. Those will be available on the city's website. We'll make sure everybody's noticed about them. We are working on revisions to the final ordinance, and we will be working on, again, once we conclude this today, we'll sit down the first part of next week, go over all the feedback that we've heard, coordinate and make updates to it, and then make that all available to the public well in advance of the first reading, so they'll have opportunities to ask questions as well. So that, we're going to turn it over to some Q&A, but I'll ask Mary if she has any final points she'd like to make.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, we're going to move to Q&A, but I want to let everyone online and in person know that if you have questions after today or something comes to you, if you'd like to have a personal meeting with us to talk about your specific situation, please let us know. We've been having those meetings. We're happy to have more and talk to you in granular level about any questions that you may have. Just reach out to me, and I'll be happy to coordinate that. We're going to take in-person questions. Again, we'll have you come up to the mic and provide your name and your question. And we also do have people putting questions into the chat. But why don't we start with in-person, since we're all in person, and then people online, we will also come to your questions. So don't be shy. If you have a question, feel free.
Deb Frazier, Executive Officer of the Treasure Coast Builders Association. I want to go back to one of the questions I asked you last night, Jonathan, if you don't mind. Going back to the east section, and you pointed it out today, thank you, that is city and county. The first column is the city and county number together, which you said today is 11.5%. On your addendum X, the percentage numbers then are incorrect from what I can see, because it's showing a 16% increase, when in reality, when you take the county numbers out so that you're doing apples to apples, it's actually a 56% increase. And so my question is, could addendum X be revised to reflect maybe just the city numbers so that we see what those city numbers actually increases are?
Thank you for that feedback. That is some of the questions we've had, and yes, we will be providing that. One of the reasons we haven't done that today is, well, when this originally started, there's provisions in statute that say the municipality that collects the building permits is the only one that collects the fees, and then you apportion them out. So that's the way we sort of originally started this. It's morphed on to where we are today. Now, the city fee, they will be separating potentially as of 2027, so the county fee will be the only one there. So we are, excellent question. We will be providing additional data in these reports, showing those phases, and also showing what it's going to be after the 2027 timeframe as well, when it's just the city fee with the interlocal expiring. So there's a lot of numbers that are out there, but we are working on that, and that is one of the items we are working on providing, because we've had some feedback requesting that as such.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we had a good question as well yesterday from the Builders Association. The very last part of August, the Institute of Transportation Engineers released their trip generation manual, which is one of the documents that we look at. We were pretty far along in terms of trying to get this out to the public to make sure we had that number out there. So when we come back with these numbers, they will reflect the latest ITE trip generation rate. For residential, they've come down a little bit. For industrial, I think they've come down a larger percent. Some of the retail, a few of the uses have actually gone up, and we're looking at those numbers in a little further detail to make sure they make sense. But the final rates will be based on the ITE trip generation 12th edition. So that's one of the questions that's also been asked by the members of the public and development community, and so we are working on providing that as well.
Good morning. My name is Ben Myers. I work with Greenpoint, the master plan community developer of Veranda and Wilder. Just a quick statement more so, and then a follow-up question. I believe you mentioned that the Northwest annexation area doesn't have existing commercial or retail services out there today to serve its existing and future residents. I just wanted to make it known and point out that 725,000 square feet of commercial is approved in a PUD and about to start commencing in that area. So I believe some of those numbers that you're seeing today aren't taking into account some of that future commercial use that will be existing very soon. So just wanted to point that out for you guys to take under consideration. Okay. And then one clarifying question I had on the more extraordinary circumstances study was the population growth that we were looking at. It seemed like in one of your exhibits, you were taking the median projection for the state of Florida, but the high projection for the St. Lucie County, and then a completely different data source for Port St. Lucie. And I was just curious what the thought process or rationale behind that was.
No, that's a great question. The state of Florida provides what's known as BEBR information, or Bureau of Economic and Business Research, and they do the forecasting for the entire state, but they only do it for the state of Florida and for the counties themselves. They don't do it for municipalities. And typically the guidance is to use the median for the state of Florida. If you actually have a fast-growing county, you'd use it to represent the fast-growing county. I think there's 12 or 13 within the whole state of Florida that are kind of considered fast-growing. And then from Port St. Lucie, we used a share of both the counties, data from BEBR, but then also working with the MPO in terms of updating the long-range model. We have all these projected developments that we then allocate to all the traffic zones, and that helps us get that future projection for the city. So you are correct that there are three different sources. Even if we use the state of Florida's high numbers, Port St. Lucie and St. Lucie County are so far above the state of Florida. So that's why those three sources are referenced that way.
Thank you. I think at some point in the presentation you mentioned that there was a 60% increase in population over the last 5 years, 2020 to 2020.
60,000 residents.
60,000?
60,000, yeah. It went from 2020 to 2025. There was 60,000 additional residents that came into the city. And we got this information because actually it was a request from BEBR, from the state of Florida, saying this growth's pretty extraordinary. We just want to, confirm with you all that these numbers are actually correct and accurate. And looking at the permit data, I mean, they are. So yeah, it's not a percentage. It's 60,000 residents during that time frame.
Sure. I think it would be helpful for the public to see the same time period from 2020 to 2025, okay, given the mass influx of new residents during the pandemic and everything that was happening during then.
Yeah, no, great feedback on that one. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Perhaps for the record, I do have a few questions online. My apologies. I have a few questions online from Aslina Goldstein, who is the representative from GL Homes and has questions for Jonathan Paul, the city's consultant. Question number 1, we have identified certain corridors that are already developer obligations to 4-lane and even 6 lanes under existing DRI orders, yet they're still being counted in the city's mobility fee model. For example, the 4-laning of Discovery Way, Community Boulevard, and Becker Road are already developer obligations under the DRI. Developers cannot be asked to pay twice for the same infrastructure. We need clarity on whether these road expansions and others will be excluded, credited, or otherwise corrected before adoption. And that's question number 1.
That's a very good question. It's one of the feedbacks we've gotten from some other community members in the Southwest, and we are looking at several of those corridors. Several of them are specific obligations. Other ones are obligations if there's a trigger at a very late stage of the development itself. The way we've always structured these fees since the very beginning, we have not included the first 2 lanes of the cost of any roadways out west. We have included the lanes 3 and 4 for those roadways. So if a developer were to build or widen any of those roadways, they would get mobility fee credit for doing so. But we can follow up with them specifically on certain corridors. And we've had some discussions with other developers in that area to make sure that we're not charging twice for the same impact. So we will follow up with GL on that.
Thank you. Question number 2, again from Aslina Goldstein. Why is the city blending county and city fees to calculate total fees to show the increase, percent and or dollar increase, when this is just concerning the update to the city's mobility fees and justifying extraordinary circumstances, especially since the reality is the city is proposing a 300+% increase to the city's mobility fee?
We are working on providing additional detail in those percentages between the cities and the counties. Right now, we collect a fee on behalf of the county, and we continue to collect a fee on behalf of the county up until the interlocal agreement expires. And there's various shares of travel that we've reduced in our fee to account for the county's fee, the same as we've done in the current mobility fee itself, to ensure that we're not double dipping. But we'll provide a further breakdown as part of this analysis. So this is how we did these fees the last time, and we've continued that. But we will be providing additional detail as it's been requested from members of the public.
Thank you. Question number 3, again, Aslina Goldstein with GL Homes. If 2,000 square feet is the standard size for a single-family home in the city, why are the tables based on 1,000 square feet? Using 2,000 square feet shows the fee jumps from $2,260 to $7,124, a 315% increase. Why not present the numbers this way for clarity, and then goes into mobility fee increase for the Southwest area, open parentheses, single-family residential, 2,000 square feet, close parentheses, and then for an exhibit provides the table that talks about 2006 to 2009 with the percentage rates to correspond with that.
Well, but part of it is in the ordinance itself. Actually, these fees are shown per square foot. That's how they're actually calculated, is on a per square foot basis. So we're working on trying to find different ways to communicate all this information out to the public. There are other tables that are included in the extraordinary circumstance. If you look at it, one of the appendix, it just isolates out single-family residential at a 2,000 square foot rate, the full dollar amount, and then compares that to the county. and compares that to a number of other municipalities as well. So there is actually a whole separate appendix in the extraordinary circumstance that looks just at single family at 2,000 square feet. Right now, we're already 450 plus pages of this. Every time we have to go out and do a calculation, there's a lot of follow-on that's got to be done with it. And we have an hour here to try to disseminate a lot of information to the public. So, all the information that's been requested is in the documentation. We can further provide that. But in terms of these numbers, we've even gone back and forth of how we show it here, because in the ordinance itself, it's actually calculated per square foot. And if you go through most of these uses, they're per 1,000 square feet. An office can be any type of uses. And when I say the average, you have a maximum here of 3,500. There are some residential units that are 1,250 square feet. There's some that are 1,500. Some are 22,500. 2,000 is a general ballpark number. So the information is there. We can work on them a little bit further if they need further clarification on how they're calculated. But there is a whole separate appendix dealing just with single family, comparing them at 2,000 square feet, both to the existing fees, the county fees, and to a number of other peer communities within the state of Florida. So that information has been provided.
Thank you. The fourth and final question online from Aslina Goldstein is, will there be an age-restricted residential rate like there is today, since ITE data shows lower trip generation?
As of right now, no, there is not. I don't believe the city actually has an official land use for that designation. And so that's being captured to the square footage calculations itself.
Hi, I'm Andrea Aniceto, just a resident. You mentioned earlier that the figures came directly from the vetted project costs, and that the bulk of the fees that are collected are from residential projects. So my question is, how many rooftops are required to be built in each area to achieve the funding that you're needing for each of these projects, and specifically within the city's jurisdiction?
That's a really good question. We can work on getting some of that information. Some of these costs are going to be funded through other means, such as sales tax, through other partnerships with the state and federal government. They're not all going to be funded by rooftops. And the one thing with development is it sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. We make some reasonable projections out there. This will fund a decent amount of it. And we can work with planning to get those numbers and provide some projections of what we believe it would fund and cover as part of this. Unless you've done.
I would say development doesn't have to pay for itself. Also, you can use money cross-benefit districts.
Let's get into it. For the residential side, we mention residential because that's what's asked for a lot, but all these uses do generate a fairly significant amount of fees. I think on average you generate about $25 to $30 million a year in mobility fees. And the county itself's collected quite a bit of fees that's sitting on today. So we can work on getting those specific numbers to y'all from the finance department.
Stephanie Morgan. A clarifying question. I thought I heard you say that Bieber shows the county, not the municipalities.
It does. But Bieber only shows the county and the state of Florida.
Okay.
But in terms of projections out into the future, they do show current
Okay.
2025 population.
Clarify, it shows every single municipality in the state.
When the Bieber does its projections out into the future, it would be great if they provided it for the cities as well, because every one of the municipalities I work with struggles with this, because it's always provided at the county level. It's never provided at the city level. But the BEBR, the Bureau of Economic Business Research, does provide current day populations. So they provided 2024, 2025, 22, 23. What they don't provide is 2026, 2030, 2035, 2040, 2050. Their projections out into the future are just for the state and just for counties. But thank you for that question. It was a good clarification.
And we have any other questions online? All right. And so with that, last call for questions, people here. Again, my name's Mary Savage Dunham, and if anyone online or in person would like to have a meeting, please let us know. We'll reach out to GL. We'll set up a meeting with them to discuss their questions in person. But we're here to answer any questions that you may have. I don't have any final comments. Do you have any final comments?
Just appreciate you all coming out and taking the time today to be informed about this and to ask questions. And I hope you stay involved in the process. Thank you very much.